So I'd like to call to order the school committee meeting on the evening of June 5th. You have before you an agenda. Can I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Comments from the public.
I'm Kim Albertson. I have been in preschool for, this is my 25th year in the preschool, and I just wanted to, first of all, say thank you to many of the school committee members have been kind of hanging around and seeing our preschool growth and see what we've been up to. And for those of you that haven't, I would really encourage you to come see us. We're big and we have a lot of needs, and I just want to remind the committee the value of early intervention and sorry, I'm nervous, front-loading services and really putting value to that. We have a great number of children coming in that have the most intensive needs that we've had in a long time. I know Michelle Brady did a great job sharing your numbers with the years in the past of how we've grown, but it's not just the number, it is the needs, and I just hope that you know that. And right now we have 3 preschools that are integrated and 1 that is substantially separate, and next year we'll have 4 because we have a significant number. Right now it looks like we have up to 31 IEPs. Many of those are going to be integrated, maybe 4 aren't, which leaves with 4 integrated classrooms, 6 or 7 kids with needs in each classroom. That's a pretty high number. So when we look at other grade levels, how many classrooms have 6, 7, 8 IEPs in them? The one thing I just want to emphasize is the fact that our program has been extremely successful in its front loading of intervention because we've been able to work with small groups, and that's because of the staffing. Really, a staffing of 1 to 4 has been tremendously impactful on the kids coming from us to kindergarten and first grade and coming off IEPs and getting those strategies early on, because that's where we want to put the money as a district and not have to pick them up later if we miss them. So right now, I really just want to encourage you to know that we really value the teacher-student ratio, and it's difficult when we think there may be changes and that may not occur. So if you have questions or if you need us to talk or come and visit us, we'd love to show you what we're doing.
Thank you very much, Kim. I mean, I think the committee recognizes the advantage of front loading. I mean, going back to Alan Myers was a big advocate of that. So
I have to say, having been there, it's really cool what they do with those kids and the different rooms and the adults that are involved. It was amazing. I could not do that.
okay. Any other questions?
I'm just going to get right to it. My name is Colleen Weldon. I don't come to these meetings a lot. I think I've only been to a couple. And as a community, we've either elected the people in this room and/or we've elected the people that have appointed them. We do this and we trust you to represent us and make decisions that are in the best interest of our community's children. As a parent, I don't really expect to hear about every little decision, but we really do want to hear about the big stuff. And we felt really left out last week. So I don't know if it's the time to discuss it or not.
Well, I thank you very, very much. And I know other people in the room may be concerned also. I think Mike will have a few things to say, but unfortunately, because of confidentiality, we're very limited in what we can really say. And there are ongoing investigations that are happening. So what I think Mike is going to say is going to be a morsel when you would like a steak. But I think that's sort of the corner we're backed into. Mike?
Okay, so it's been a challenging couple of weeks for everybody, and certainly concerns throughout the community. I can't get into anything that would name any students, of course, and I think you know and appreciate that. I can tell you that 2 weeks ago, or on the 25th of May, we had a bomb threat called in, and the secretary took that immediately shared it with Dr. Bucky, who called me and began investigating that and called in the police department to join him. Whenever we have a threat of any kind, we have a protocol that we follow to assess that threat. And we examine that together with the police department and determine whether it's credible or whether it's not credible. If it is credible, we would certainly contact the entire community. If it's deemed not credible, and there are any number of reasons, and I have to be honest, I'm not going to share that protocol, because to share that protocol might arm somebody who wanted to make their threat look more credible, if that makes sense. So, but we do have a protocol. Chief and I and John Bucky sat down and said, we don't believe that this poses any threat. Bill and the school resource officers worked very closely with us on that. Some people have asked, well, then why is there an investigation, a further investigation? I think that's a question in people's minds. Anytime there is a phone call like that, whether we think it's credible or not credible, we are going to try to find out who made that call. And so the investigation is into phone records. I know that John and Karen McGonigal spent a great deal of time going through our records. It was a blocked call, and so we now have the provider, Verizon, involved, and we called in higher law enforcement officials to help us with that. So we do that whether it's credible or not, because if we can determine who did it, to us, it's still a threat, and we want to put an end to that. So we thought that had been sort of put to bed, stopped, until Sunday night, and things exploded on the social media on Sunday night. John, a student, sent a text to a teacher, who sent a text to Dr. Bucky, who was off island at a graduation, and he called me, and I was in touch with Chief Pittman, who had his detectives follow the leads of what the social media posts were. There were a number of posts. As they researched those leads, they couldn't find one person who heard anything, a direct threat. It was all hearsay, people pointing to the next person. And you can imagine, as they start to investigate that, they go to that next person. What did you hear? And then they go to the next person, and what do you hear? Did you hear? So that they can get to the origin of that. And Chief said, Mike, I will tell you that this poses absolutely no risk in my opinion. There is nothing new here. This is old stuff that popped back up and became a social media firestorm, I think was his term. So a lot of time has been spent, but this was late Sunday night, and I'm not a close follower of social media, I'll be honest, but word gets back to me, and I had to make the decision whether to have school the next day, which is Monday, or not. Even though I was hearing that there was, no credible threat, I thought the firestorm was such that nobody would, or half the kids wouldn't even come to school on Monday, and that I needed to meet further with the police department and to meet with the administrative team. So we spent Monday morning in several meetings, about an hour and a half with the principals and the police department, key people in the police department. We were filling the gaps in for them, what they knew or didn't know, and they were filling the gaps in for us. But they could point to no student who had heard directly from a threat from any student. It was all, well, I heard from so-and-so, and that's why in my letter I referenced the telephone game, because it was like a whisper, started and went around a circle, and then when you get back, it's very different than the original statement or comment. I think Chief summed it up. He said, "Mike, I've got a senior in school. I am not going to put her in harm's way or anybody else's child in harm's way if I have the slightest reason to believe that there is a risk for our children." And so he and I agreed, and the administrative team, that we would reopen this morning. Actually, we started with the academic awards last night. We had a huge turnout for the academic awards, and we had great attendance at school this morning in all of our schools. But we did talk, I think two of the faculties, the high school and middle school faculties came in yesterday to talk about how they were going to handle this with the kids this morning, to try to reassure them. And then the other two faculties, NES and NIS, met this morning before school to talk about how they were going to talk to the kids about it. And from all reports, we had a productive day with kids, back at school and into routines. And that's pretty much the most that I can tell you at this point.
Sure, but it's going to be going in a circle, because what Mike said is...
I have something related to that.
Sure.
In terms of your letter, you spoke about teachable moments, and I wonder, without giving out a student's name or too many details, many of us were blindsided with this, and perhaps we could have quieted the storm before it ever got to social media if we had a little information like, a threat was made, it's not credible, please assure your children that it's not credible, because I think if you were to take a moment to walk it back, all of that could have been avoided with just a little bit of transparency. Certainly, I respect the privacy of other people's children. If they, one of the reasons why you hold their name is because sometimes when you're younger, you make difficult or incorrect choices, and we certainly don't want someone's life to be changed, the path of their life to be changed completely because of a bad choice they made. But there are 700 other kids in this building that deserve the right to feel safe too.
Yeah, I think hindsight's 20/20. As I look at it, should I have gone out? I talked to Chief about going out in an announcement that when it first happened, and I think the key for us was that it was in no way credible, and a lot of people have connected some dots to a particular student or two particular students, and I think that's unfortunate for that child. And I think it's when you speculate, when you share information that is, connecting those dots when they're not to be connected. Today, in fact, we had somebody say, I point to somebody else who may have made that threat. And so it really hit home saying, wow, we're out there talking and people are sure that it's this one child, but it may not be. And I think we have to be very careful, and certainly educators have to be very careful not to play into, I don't want to say vilifying, but being trial and jury before we have enough evidence to really go. Bill said if he had enough evidence to move, he would have moved on this, but he doesn't.
I have a question.
Sure.
About the bomb threat. You said it was called into the school, the bomb threat was?
Yes.
The office?
Yeah.
What time was that?
Pardon? 12:30 on Friday the 25th.
And so school was still going on?
Yep.
And it wasn't evacuated?
It was not because of what was said. Was not either an imminent threat at all, or nor was it a call that we felt required that.
Hi, Toby. So I just think this is a little kind of wishy-washy. Excuse me, I didn't expect to speak, but some of your wording is not really. We got kids, we've got several shootings that have gone on in this country, and you get a call, and you're saying, I guess it wasn't credible. So are we to say nobody got suspended and there was no threat? Because if I'm a student right now and I'm calling in some bomb threat, I might have some psychological problems. And I want to know, number one, why didn't you tell the teachers? I asked several teachers, like, what bomb threat? We heard it from social media that even happened. I'm sorry, that is just.
Yeah.
I mean, I grew up in a town of 400 kids in my school. We had bomb threats all the time. We went home. We always knew it was a prank, but bottom line is, what if it wasn't a prank? Parkland was in Parkland where they told the FBI, and then guess what? Fell through the cracks. And I'm not saying I think police did a super job, and I realize that. But at the same point, we have kids going to school. We have voting here during the day. We got a lot of problems with the security. And number one, I think all teachers, you might not have been able to say the name of the person, but the teacher should have been notified that, hey, we got to watch out if we see something crazy. That's all I.
And if I can respond, and I don't want to keep this going because it could go all night, but the high school faculty was notified that day. The error, in my opinion, and I said this to some middle school teachers yesterday, I did not have Peter talk to the middle school staff. So that's my fault. And we should have, analyzed that and gone out to them and let them know. You could say the same about the intermediate and elementary as well, and I would rethink that if it were to happen again. The problem is that as you start to widen that net of people who are included, then you may as well, to your point, go out to everybody, because there's no way that 4 faculties are going to know about something and it not, go out to somebody in the community. So, yeah.
Could I just respond to that as well? Your concern about evacuation that day. It's my understanding, and Mike and Mr. Bucky can confirm, it was not a threat that something was going to happen that day. It had a future reference.
Well, yeah, and I want to be careful here. It wasn't a threat that day. It wasn't, there's a bomb in the building.
Right.
Let's just leave it at that.
So was there somebody suspended or not suspended?
No, because we don't know who made the threat.
Okay.
That's what we're trying to get to. If we can find out who made that threat, then there will be follow-up action.
I mean, that falls into the category of a federal offense. And there are certain logistical problems in getting that information, and that's being worked on as we speak. And this will be the last one, because
Megan Washington. I had to reach out to principal to find out what the follow-up was going to be today. And that's really concerning to me. Whether or not you thought it was real, our kids thought it was real, might give a trick crime. That's real to me. Whether or not the threat was real, there should have been more communication. I had to reach out to counselors, I had to reach out to teachers, I had to reach out to find out what was going to happen today. Instead of minimalizing it on your end, that's how I thought as a parent. It was very minimalized. It was a social media thing. That's the world that we're in today. Everything is social media, and these kids were scared. The incident with the school, the truck at the school. Apparently that wasn't handled well. Parents have not been, and it all came back to them. It was very raw. You handled it very well, and I'm very appreciative of that. Sorry, that didn't come out right. The kids didn't know what was going on. It was like in the heat of the moment, they were scared. All that emotion came back when they got the threat, and then there's no follow-up. The school, if there was no danger yesterday, why wasn't there information for those kids? Maybe you could come up if you are feeling nervous, come up and with your parents, come up and be a counselor. Then I reached out, and then the counselor stopped my student in the hallway today with her friends. Like, there's no.
I think what I gave the principals as direction is that your students and how this should be rolled out. You should talk to your staff and determine the best way depending on the age of the children. So what you might want to do at the high school would not be necessarily what you would want to do at the elementary school. And I think the elementary and intermediate decided rather than have an assembly of children at that age, they would let their teachers, who are the people that they're most comfortable with, address that. Correct me if I'm wrong. And then, go ahead, Ms. Moran.
Sure, and then you can, at our 7:15 staff meeting, our counselors can provide resources to our teachers. But we also understand that some parents, per choice, want to keep their kids really innocent and protect them from all of that, and other parents want their kids to know the realities of the world, or they have older siblings and they're just going to know it. So, yeah, we have that balance too, so it's really tricky. You want to meet every child where they're at, but you don't want to provide the opportunity for students who are completely innocent with all of it. You don't want to taint their world either. So it was a please, as kids ask questions, try to pull them aside and individually and assess if they should talk to a counselor more about it, or if they're satisfied with whatever they're doing.
And I think at the middle school, Peter, you brought the students in for an assembly to address it, and then they went back to the classroom for follow-up. Am I correct?
Yep, correct. Yeah, we just all assembled in the gym, entire student body and staff, just so that instead of teachers delivering slightly different messages, everybody heard the same message, and I could just assure everybody that they were safe.
So,
going forward, do you have any plans about the school security? Bringing my daughter to school this morning, she was still extremely nervous about going to school. When we pulled into the back and there was police officers in the back, she said, "Oh, I feel much better. I'll go to school now."
right.
And I'm kind of guessing we're not going to have that every day. But going forward, is there a plan that other than just?
That was one of the things that we discussed with the police department yesterday, was their presence. I'm sure if you drove by, you saw police officers and you saw administrators at every entrance. It's not unusual to see the administrators at the entrances, but the big difference probably was an officer in the back, where there hasn't always, at both entrances. That is great. The challenge is probably that the police department is down quite a few members. They're pretty short-staffed. And so they are doing the best that they can for as long as they can. But I don't want to speak for them and say that will continue. We've also done some other security issues. I'm sure you may have noticed as you walk through the halls that the academic wings were locked down. So we don't have the access at night to those. This building was pretty open before, so that's another step that we have taken. and closing a lot of the common rooms. The downside of that will be that sometimes we hustle kids out of here at the end of the day. And, we sometimes get criticized for hustling kids out of here because this is a safe place for them to be. So there's a sort of a double-edged sword as you try to provide security, because you can lose some of the welcoming aspects of schools that I'll speak for me, that I enjoyed when I went to school. But it was a different day and age. You may remember that we've had parents push back about the entrance to NIS, and parents push back to the entrance of NES. And so we're sort of caught trying to please, both ends of the spectrum on that, to make it secure, but also make it welcoming. And it's a difficult challenge when we narrow down the entrances, which we've done considerably over the years. It creates a funnel effect and slows down some of the entrance. When I came 8 years ago, we didn't even have these. We didn't have any of the doors locked. We didn't have the video communication systems at the front of those. So we're doing a lot of things. I said to Marianne Stanton today, I know that we have to do those things. I know we have to add, for example, a vestibule at the high school, which we are going to do. Sometimes I wish we could spend that amount of money, on people resources instead of facilities, because I think it would maybe have a greater impact on the well-being. And when I say people resources, I mean guidance counselors, social workers, people to help a number of kids in need.
I mean, the Safety and Security Committee has been pretty diligent about moving ahead. I think you can take a look at NIS, and they're very well protected. I think that moving up to the other schools, this has to be done. Unfortunately, it's expensive, and unfortunately will irritate some of you when you run up against locked doors, but that's what we have to do.
I mean, school design is totally different today than it was when the elementary school was built. You wouldn't have all those exterior doors to that school in today's design. Just look at the difference between NES and NIS. So it's totally different. And of course, this building too has a number of doors, and kids sometimes don't help us by leaving a pencil in the door or a piece of paper in the door so that their friend can come in. I mean, we're constantly going around checking those sorts of things. We do intruder tests here as well. A couple times a year, I work with the police department and have somebody unknown to anybody walk into the school and see how far they can go. That's another piece. So there are a lot of things done, and then there are some other measures that have been taken that I wouldn't talk about publicly, because the need to know, in a public forum would hurt our safety and security of the. So.
Sure, that's the last question.
So NIS and the middle school have the second, or they have that entrance before you enter into the school. What is that actually doing? It's not really doing anything. He has a gun in his backpack.
Well,
He's going through one door to go into the next door. That's not really stopping him for doing anything.
yeah, I think the vestibules are basically for the outside, people who would come in from the outside. We don't have metal detectors. Will that be the next step? Someday, probably.
The elementary school
Yep. You have to do that at the high school too.
That to me is not. From September, we've been in this school, you know who my husband is, you know who I am, you know who my kid is. If he's gonna go blow up the school, you're gonna know who he is, so what is standing in your ID gonna do?
I can answer that. I work at the elementary school. I'm a teacher there. It's stopping having 150 people in the morning walking around because I don't know you, I don't know your husband. And when you stop, I mean, yes, God forbid, if you have a gun, you can blow through anything,
Right.
but that stops people from just walking around. We had 150 people who, we had no idea who these people, they were drinking coffee in the morning, chatting, reading, opening doors. So I have to say, I'm there every morning and it's been great. Kids love it. They think it's special that I talk to them every morning. They smile, they know who I am. But still having someone leave their license, I know, okay, this child actually is with the father, not a random stranger who can take the kid and take it off the side door. So it's a security. It seems important, but I'll take that over.
And that is so we can account for who is in the building. That's so we can account for the number of people and who is in the building. And that's really important.
And you'll get the visitor passes back.
Right, exactly. We know that they've left.
I don't think our question is, why are we doing it? I think it's, what is that?
Well, the inner doors in the vestibules are locked.
Diane has a comment.
Yeah.
She said, never mind.
Diane?
I just want to say, another reason that we collect licenses for and give you visitor passes, it gives you access to go in. We know you're in the building, we know why you're in the building. In the event of an emergency, first responders need to know who is in the building. And before, the doors were just wide open and we didn't know. Now we have an accountability of who is in our building. You're right, it doesn't stop someone from bringing a weapon in or anything like that. I think, you know, Mr. Goldberg said maybe medical detectives is the next step, but this is something that happens in every school in the Commonwealth. They stop you, they ask you for your license.
It just makes sense that we should not stop that.
Well, I think it is stopping something. It's not stopping the group that you're talking about, the students, and I understand that. You know, I think this is an example of what we're trying to do is walk that balance and how much is too much and how much is too little. It's a very, and if something happens, nothing is too little. I get that. But what is that threshold that will determine the next measures that we take?
I'm on the safety and security subcommittee, and I've been doing a lot of research. I have 3 kids in 3 different schools, and by all means, safety and security is my number one priority, and it has been since my child first entered, since my oldest entered. And I mean, like Mike said, there is a whole range of things that we can do. I mean, schools are now implementing no backpacks allowed. Schools are implementing, you know, transparent backpacks. I mean, there are measures. I feel like we have really good measures in place. I feel very safe and secure sending my kids to school. And I feel like we are doing everything we can possibly do to keep them safe.
So all the doors are locked other than the front doors.
During the day?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yes.
all the doors are locked.
All the shop doors.
And you know what?
That is a discussion.
That is a
come up.
discussion, and that's something that we talked about yesterday and reinforced with Mike Gervin and Derek Molson, who are the teachers there. That's hard. That's hard because you're going in and out working on the shed, or you're going in and out with cars. But we have to tighten that up.
I'll take one more question on this, and then we got a full agenda. We're going to be here till midnight.
You talked about school, after school and everything. What about in the morning? There's about 5 entrances between the middle and the high school. Is there any type of check at those 5 entrances?
There are 2 entrances in the front, the middle school and the high school. There's the ramp in the back, and there's the CPS cafeteria, and we have the pool. We're closing the pool entrance down except for the pool so that people have to walk around. We're not closing those back entrances, but we have administrators and this morning and moving forward, police officers there for a period of time. All of our parking is in the back of the school. So to walk around from there all the way to the front, it's another, it's another one of those examples of how much is too much, and if it's raining, is it more than an inconvenience?
Like it was last night for the academic awards.
I did drive up to the school this morning to pick up grandchildren, and I saw the police and everything. The only thing is the kitchen door. I noticed somebody walking in through the kitchen door without a key, without a pass.
You sure they didn't have a pass? Because that should not have been open.
I did not see a pass. I saw somebody walk up the stairs, open the door.
Okay.
It was just, the timing was...
That's something that we'll look at, but those are, that's on a computer and those are locked down.
I may not have seen the pass.
Okay.
Okay.
Just stuck out.
Yep.
Okay, so I'm going to call a close to this because after this, we're just sort of beating up what doors are open or not open. And if Mike had his way yesterday, everybody had to walk from the back parking lot around. Some of us thought perhaps it was better to just seal off the back entrance to be able to come in. So I'd like to move on to presentations and discussions of issues of interest to the committee. We'll start off with the Rotary conversation.
We had a presentation on, I think it was May 16th, and I know that Steve came by and I was there, and I know that others weren't able to go to that meeting. It was interesting. I think the two intersections that affect the school the most are the Bartlett Road Surfside intersection and Sparks Surfside. They had a third that they presented that night, which was the Fairgrounds Old South Road. But I think that was interesting to those of us who live on that road, but not necessarily school. I just have up on the background one of the Rotaries. This is at Bartlett Road, which that probably, and I know you were there and I know you were there, that probably generated the greatest debate as to whether to have a Rotary. Some people felt that we should have a three-way stop, and there were all sorts of suggestions.
Yeah. I have reached a conclusion, but it's not just based on what I saw and heard that night. They tried very hard to convince us that mostly I was looking at the one right outside the high school, the Four Corners. And they tried very hard to convince us that pedestrians were safer with moving vehicles. I'm serious. They had diagrams. I have had community members come up to me afterwards to try to convince me that what they were planning was safer than having a four-way stop. I recognize and accept that it would be a boon to travel. I've been stuck at that intersection as often as any of you for very long periods of time. But I still cannot accept that moving vehicles are safer for pedestrians. They may be a little safer moving in because the crosswalk is before the Rotary, but they're not going to be safer moving out. They have to go out across another crosswalk. So, our kids are they promised us, by the way, data, and on how many people use these crossings. I haven't seen it on the town website. It hasn't been provided to us. So I don't know how many, but it's got to be hundreds of our kids coming through Four Corners twice a day, and not just high school and middle school kids, of which we have 700 now, 700 plus. We've got kids coming through there on their way down to NIS and NES. And I've seen the same thing at Bartlett. I drove Bartlett onto Surfside for 12 years, coming to school. The kids are coming in before our crossing guards because they can't be out there, for hours. And I have reached the conclusion, me personally, that the Rotaries are not safer for our kids.
I have seen this presentation, having been on the school committee long enough, this keeps resurfacing.
Yeah.
I have concerns very much like Steve. I don't, if I go down by the bank and I look at that Rotary, I don't think that that's safe for kids to be crossing. I just don't. I think Bartlett Road is an abomination, having had my office there for a while. You couldn't pull out without being picked off. And I'm just very concerned about our kids. I'd put up stop signs there. I mean, the argument is, well, somebody will blow the stop sign. Well, I mean, I just think the kids have a better chance than having a roadie where you have vehicles going around and kids sort of skipping across the sides.
And we have lots of kids coming through that
just
intersection.
doesn't seem safe to me.
Is there the possibility of having the crossing before the Rotary, like up Bartlett Road, kind of near where your office used to be, having a crossing there and coming down, and then having another crossing like a little bit further?
But you have cars, you got cars that are coming down, going down Bartlett Road, they're going very fast.
And if there are no stop signs either way on Bartlett, who's to say they're looking for kids? And we have a lot of kids coming through there.
I
I
really don't like the pedestrians in the little baby Rotary there near the post office.
No, but that's the problem. I mean, it's not safe to my mind. Okay, I'm not a builder, I'm not an architect, I'm not a planner, but having had kids, when I lived at the Lima Cottage, had my kids crossing right there, I felt much better with the stop signs than I would dancing around a Rotary. And I mean, that's...
Chair, may I ask, where do we stand as school committee making do we have a voice on this, or where are we?
Well, I think that's a great question. You have a voice, whether you're not the deciding factor. I don't believe. We have a meeting next week, I think the 12th, with the admin and Mike Burns to talk about the Rotaries. I think they wanted to get our thoughts and so I certainly said, okay, we'll meet and give you our feedback.
School committee members?
I would check with him. Now, Mike was going to come here. To be fair to him, originally the plan was for him to come to a school committee meeting,
right.
But then their presentation was the same week anyway, so I said, well, why would we have him do it twice? But then people couldn't go to it.
Right.
Well, I would recommend, and I'll make a motion to this effect.
But let's let
that we see. Oh, did you have more questions? I'm sorry.
No, I'm just in support. I'm in support of stop signs. I don't agree with the Rotaries.
I mean, I'll make a motion for a consensus.
I want to hear from Pauline.
I do too.
Thank you, Steve. I feel that we need more information, and I would like us to be part of the decision, or at least part of the conversation. And I was not able to attend that particular meeting, so I don't know what our agenda looks like, but I think that people who have a concern and a vested interest are our families, and they're more likely to be watching a school committee agenda than they would be for a discussion through the town. So I might ask that we return back to Mike Burns and see if he could come to the school committee meeting.
Mike, did they say when they're going to be making the decision?
No, they were still in the information gathering stage, is what I was led to believe. I can ask him if he can come and speak on the 19th of June. There are a couple of things on that agenda that we can push over. So that would I could easily move the ELL PAC update, and so I don't think that's a problem whatsoever if it works for him. And if not, then I would ask him for the July, if that's your wish.
I think
the committee would consider that.
Yeah, I think that's a better way to approach it.
I have no problem with that as long as we don't keep pushing it back so far that they all of a sudden make their decision. I asked specifically and loudly at the meeting what the timeline was, and they said they don't have one.
Well, through the chair, if Mike isn't available to come at the next meeting, can we join your meeting with the administrators?
He is pretty accommodating, so I will ask him to do that, because the advantage, I think, as Pauline said, to have it here has the broadcast to audience, our school audience, who might be most interested in that.
Okay.
So I'll check with him. I'll ask him about June 19th and the July meeting if not.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
And confirm that nothing will be decided before that.
Well, I can't.
You can ask.
I can ask. Yeah, I don't control that.
I understand.
They've already bought some land. I do know that.
Well, they bought that a long time ago.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we've been here before.
Okay, another certainly not controversial issue, the marijuana recreational use. Does the school committee have a sense of how they feel about this, and would they make a recommendation to the town? And it seems like the pony is out of the barn, but the question is how many ponies are going to get out, and I think that's where we perhaps play a role. Does anybody want to?
Well, just to update you, Mike and I were at the meeting that they had. I was a little late because the Inky mistyped the starting time, but I think most of the questions were asked again at the end by other latecomers. My understanding is that the select people can vote to ban retail establishments, but if they do that, it has to go to a ballot. And if the ballot rejects what they said, then we have the Wild West. There can be as many retail outlets as people or organizations can convince the town meet the regulations. Another option is for the select people to permit 2 retail outlets, which would be the maximum under the regulations, 20% of your retail alcohol retailers, which would be 1.6 because there are 8 of them, and the law says they got to round it up. If the select people vote for 2, then it doesn't have to go to a ballot. If they vote for 1, it does have to go to a ballot. And so those are the alternatives. They could go for 5 or 10, but I did not get the sense that they were interested in having more than the 2. So that's, I think, the procedural. I was initially concerned about the zoning because right across the street on Surfside is zoned appropriately for these establishments, but there is in the statute a 500-foot prevention, exemption, and I think it's from the property line. They had another word for it. I'm assuming it meant property line. So that would cover that whole retail area and eliminate that possibility. So those are, I believe, all the possible permutations. And I'm personally in favor of going for the 2.
So what are you looking to get from us tonight?
We've been approached by the town to give our thoughts about it, essentially. Since we are the school committee, but that's one thing we can't control.
Right. I think for the safety and well-being of our students, to minimize the number of possible retail stores is the most important. So whatever we can do to, minimize that.
Pauline?
I mean, I would be for minimalizing the number of retail. I'm sitting here thinking medical marijuana is legal. But what are we looking at as a school for our policy of allowing students, or I don't know of any way that you can check a student who has used medical marijuana, who is, legally allowed to ingest marijuana before coming to school. So that's on my mind more of a bigger picture of how we are going to tackle that, and that's something that I believe the student could be doing now, couldn't they?
Well, I think they have to be licensed, and I think that's a little bit tricky for somebody under 21, to be honest. I mean, there are a number of people on the Cape that will sell you a license for $200, but I think that may be one limiting factor, and that certainly is a problem.
Mm-hmm.
I think, to my mind, it's a horrible new world because I think there's good evidence that brains are not fully developed until their late 20s. Boys probably until they're 35, but there is damage done by the marijuana to the developing brain. And there is evidence that people that smoke a lot of dope aren't in the top third of the class. And I think that's a real problem. And I think normalizing it, to me, is a mistake. And you can say, well, it'll be like alcohol. You won't be able to buy it until you're 21. Well, you know what? That doesn't hold a lot of water with me. Marijuana is readily available. I think it's unfortunate that we've come to this, but I would be in favor of minimalizing the exposure that there is. It's unfortunate that we're here because I think it's a mistake of grandiose proportions, and but we're stuck with it.
So if I may, I think this is great to, and I'll bring this to the board meeting tomorrow night. Libby's asked me to speak on your behalf. But I would add one other thing that I'm very concerned about, and we have had an experience this year. We had a child at the elementary school, probably a third or fourth grader, who came to school and was having some sort of reaction. We didn't know at the time what it was, but we found that she had gotten a bag of edible marijuana and ingested it and was in pretty shaky condition, and we didn't know what was precipitating that, so we were ready to go to the hospital, but the parent came. And I think the edible marijuana, recreational, I don't want to touch the medicinal issue, that really worries me for our children. And I don't know that anything can change on that, but I'd love your authority to register that concern tomorrow night if you wanted me to.
I think we should have a motion with a recommendation that Mike can take with him, and I think it can incorporate both of those. I won't word it yet. The thrust of it would be we recommend limiting retail establishments to 2, and to whatever extent possible, because I think Mike and I heard it a little differently on edibles, that edibles be limited.
Well, if there's the option to limit to 1, why wouldn't we support that?
Has to go to a vote.
I understand that.
And if it goes to a ballot, well, if we can recommend anything, but if the Board of Select People votes for 1, it goes to a ballot, and if the ballot rejects their 1, then it's the Wild West.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
May I? Sure. As I heard it, Steve is right that if it goes to 1, you have to go through a ballot, not just town meeting. If you voted 2, it would go to town meeting, but not to the ballot.
Okay, I didn't remember that.
And the
but-
concern is that with 2/3 of the community passing the original vote in support of marijuana, anything that would go to the ballot would be doomed. So that, I think, was the reasoning as I understood it.
My question is, with this coming, has any work been done on the personnel policies in terms of once it's legal to have it, like beyond medical, what is the possession on school property? If it's legal for them to have, will they be allowed to have it on them? And that is a big concern for me, because if they know that, Mrs. Proach, the teacher, likes to keep the edibles in her bag, she can't let her bag out of her sight.
Who's the they, just to clarify?
Staff. Oh,
Well, you have to be 21 to
I
buy it.
understand that, but I'm talking about teachers.
you're talking about staff
staff and teachers.
having it on them during the school day on property.
Yes, there
We have a
are
policy
there are
against.
policies.
I don't think it's been well thought out, to be honest, at the state level, because if you have a CDL, commercial driver's license, the feds take a very unilluminated view of this. If you have a positive urine, there goes the license. So there is this problem. The other problem is, how do you legally bring marijuana to Nantucket? Now, you can't, because the feds control the boats and the feds control the airplanes. Legally. So those are all issues. I think we're stuck with it. We're going to have to see. I think
We do have a policy, though.
but as we encounter
Place.
bumps, we'll have to deal with it.
Sorry to use you as an example, I just saw your name.
Well,
You saw my bag.
Smell it from here, Pauline. Shall I make a motion?
well, you can make a motion, or Mike can bring the.
Well, I would like to move that the committee recommend to the Board of Select People that retail establishments be limited to 2. Also, that to whatever extent possible, edibles are limited.
Okay. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Okay. We solved the marijuana issue next.
Yeah, it
now-
got easier.
Peter, are you going to present a draft of the CPS schedule?
Just some updates that were
Okay.
Can you come sit up here?
Do you have any?
I don't. So I'm prepared to share some updates that were requested about things that we do every year in the name of continuous improvement at the middle school. I wasn't planning on this being an open forum, so I've seen some back and forth on the other 2 issues but I'm hopeful that I can just answer your questions and that we can, as a faculty, we have discussions about this all the time.
It's not as interesting as roundabout.
No, not nearly as interesting as the last 2 topics, for sure. But as I said, continuous improvement is we make a commitment to that every year. So every year we live our schedule, and we notice that there are either areas that we'd like to improve or things that didn't quite work out in practice the way we thought they would on paper, or staffing changes. And so when you create a schedule, for one, we set out knowing that there is no perfect schedule. It's very difficult to come up with a schedule that pleases everybody. When you put together a committee of teachers, as we did a few years ago when we did a pretty major overhaul of the schedule, everybody comes to that, as they should, with kind of their lens on. So everybody's kind of fighting for the same amount of limited time that we have. The start time and the end time is set. Other obstacles include lunch periods. We share cafeteria space with the high school. Other obstacles include shared staff. So we have to make sure that the high school schedule and the middle school schedule meshes enough so that shared staff can be at both buildings and their schedule works. And so when we had that major move to a new schedule a few years ago, the committee met my first year and then implemented the new schedule in my second. We created a really nice schedule, but it was a 6-day schedule. That didn't mean we had Saturday school. It just simply meant that we were on this rotation of 6 days. That made it very difficult for shared staff in particular because the other schools were not on a 6-day schedule. So last year we didn't get a whole committee back together. We simply made some adjustments to the schedule that the committee had come up with. And this year we've been on a 5-day schedule so that we're aligned with the other schools so that those shared staff didn't have to wake up and know that it was a Tuesday. And so they were following their Tuesday schedule at the other schools they worked at. But for us, it was a day 3 or day 4 or day 5 or day 6, that kind of thing. So we've been operating on a 5-day schedule this year. And some things have worked out pretty smoothly with that. It wasn't a major adjustment, but other things have been a little bit more complicated. So some of the things we've been reflecting on and adjustments that we'll make as we move forward are intended to improve class size, for example. So the way that some of our encore classes, that's like PE, art, music, things like that, were scheduled this year. The schedule was so tight that it locked too many kids into a set schedule. So, for example, if kids were in world languages, then they all ended up in a similar PE class, and all of a sudden we had a PE class of over 40, and we had an art class of 30, and those are numbers that aren't acceptable to us. So the adjustments that we're making are really to remedy that situation with class sizes. The other thing is we're a middle school, and one of the key components to a middle school is to make sure that we have time within the schedule for grade level teams to meet, and that's in place now. It's been in place since I've been here, and will continue to be in place. One thing we're trying to come up with, but it adds a more complicated piece to the jigsaw puzzle of scheduling, is not only having time on the schedule for a grade level team to meet, but also having time for teachers in the 3 grade levels within a department to meet. So, for example, all of the science teachers in grades 6, 7, and 8 to meet within the school day would be really valuable work as we continue to work on curriculum shifts and work on standards and practices. So that's one of the adjustments that we're looking to see if that's possible within the school day. Within a school, we have some not so desirable duties for teachers, like lunch duty, cafeteria supervision. This year in the schedule, the way it works, that really falls just about exclusively to our encore teachers. The way their schedule is structured, they were the ones that were kind of available to supervise the cafeteria, trying to come up with a way to share the wealth a little bit and spread that out amongst more teachers to be able to have some lunch duties. The other thing is we've got some populations of students that we have a lot of requirements to fulfill. Some of our special education, our IEPs dictate some of the ways that we can schedule. Our English learners dictate some of the ways that we can schedule. And with both of those groups, often the state is putting out new guidelines, particularly with English learners. There are new guidelines every year about how much time English learner services need to take place and what it can be, what it can replace or not. And so we really are working on improving our ability to be able to deliver those required services for English learners and for special education students. Our current schedule has 6th grade operating on 1 bell schedule. We don't actually ring bells, but their times for when they change classes is different than 7th and 8th. 7th and 8th are aligned. So one of the things we're working on to provide as much flexibility as possible is to align all 3 grade levels on the same, what we call the bell schedule. Again, we're not going to start ringing bells, but bell schedule. That's similar at the high school, where all 4 grade levels at the high school operate on the same time schedule. And so that will give us a lot more flexibility. So we have 2 teachers, for example, that teach English learners. And so because of the way our schedule worked, in the past, we had 1 teacher just for 6th grade. The other had to do 7th and 8th grade. As our numbers have grown with English learners, as you've heard in other previous presentations, it'll give us much more flexibility if both ESL teachers can work with students in all 3 grade levels as opposed to that 2/3, 1/3 breakdown. Interventions are a key component of adjustments that we'll make to the schedule. We're constantly looking at math intervention and different models to see how it's worked, and that's evolved every year that I've been here. We'll continue to evolve for next year. But ultimately, like the biggest reason for making adjustments are to remedy, just little flaws or little adjustments that we can make in the current schedule so that we don't have like I said, the PE class of 40 or the art class of 30. So that's what we're working on. Overall, will it look very different for a student this year to next? No. Will it look very different for a teacher from this year to next? No, with the exception of maybe the PE teacher who will be relieved to not have a class of 40. Some of the other questions that you all shared with me included an update on like project-based learning, for example. We are nearing the end of year 2 of a 2-year pilot. So you'll recall a couple of years ago, Mrs. Lombardi and Mrs. Crowley came forward with a proposal to incorporate project-based learning and to pilot that on a pretty small scale. So it was basically 1 class of 7th graders and one class section of 7th graders and 1 section of 8th graders in English and math over the course of 2 years. And they really deserve a ton of kudos for the work that they've done. They were inspired by an idea of schools from as far away as San Diego, schools like High Tech High, to come up with this idea. They did an excellent job in year 1, and then they've far surpassed what they did in year 1 and year 2. It's an unbelievable project that they're working on with students creating little libraries, basically, that you'll start seeing popping up around town. They've gotten some nice free social media buzz about this because I think all the students had to learn the HDC process. And so on the HDC agenda, all of a sudden, there were all these businesses asking for permission to put, I think they called them book boxes on the HDC agenda. And so all of a sudden, someone posted on Facebook, what are these book boxes and should I want one? Because it looks like everybody wants one. And so then we were able to kind of promote like what we're doing. So it's really awesome work that they've done. So there were, as great as it's been, there were challenges with it being a 2 grade level thing, and for it being so restricted to just 1 section. So we really want to incorporate these kinds of opportunities for many more students. So Mrs. Lombardi and Mrs. Crowley are working on incorporating project-based learning into all of their classes at the 7th grade level exclusively next year. So we think that that's going to be a stronger model for this, and we hope that other grade levels will also, maybe on a smaller scale, incorporate more project-based learning opportunities as well. So it's really
question about that?
Yeah.
Is it going to stay with math and English, or are we going to try to expand throughout the different?
It is. My belief is that they are. They're constantly sharing out with what they're doing. So I wouldn't be surprised. He's in the audience, so I'm just going to put him on the spot. But Mr. Millen, the social studies teacher, I wouldn't be surprised to see him try to get hooked into it at some point. Mrs. McVicker's here, so there's certainly connections that potentially could happen that way. So there's no set plan right now to have it be across all subject areas, but that team works so well together that I wouldn't be surprised to see them start making some connections like that. Big questions at the middle school, always around math and advanced math and accelerated math and Algebra 1 and this race to Algebra 1 and beyond that, the race to calculus. And so we've done a ton of reflecting on that this year. So you recall in the fall, I think I presented to you about how we've started accelerated pathways in grade 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And we've done some real lot of examination of the data. And what we did to determine who was going to be in those accelerated math classes, and that's what we called them this year, accelerated math. We looked at the data that we had, MCAS scores, performance in class, MAP scores, and we took the kids that were at the top on those data points, but not necessarily that they were actually ready for an accelerated class. So we took the top 25 kids, for example, I would say. But it's been difficult for us to actually accelerate the pace because when we give pre-assessments of units, they're not ready to go at a much faster pace than other students. They happen to be at the top of the class, but not necessarily ready for that acceleration. So we're shifting the name of it to an advanced math class and having stricter criteria to get into the class so that it's not just that you're at the top of the class relative to all your peers, that you're actually proving on benchmark assessments that you're actually ready to go into an advanced class. Now, will that mean that some students will eventually get to Algebra 1 in 8th grade? It's possible. Right now, we just don't have the data backing that up. And as we start looking at school systems across the country, I think it was San Francisco, for example, that said they're not going to have algebra in 8th grade at all. They're just going to have students start algebra in 9th grade. And what they've seen is that their scores have really gone up quite a bit because they're doing the foundational work. So we continue to have a math focus in our district, and our scores in the past, as we've talked a lot about, have not been at where we're at. That means that we inherit students that are lacking some foundational skills, move into the district without the same kind of background that we want them to have. And so we don't want to just arbitrarily set kids up to be in a class that they can't keep pace with. So the numbers of kids in those advanced math classes may drop from this year to next. And then our hope is, as the math program continues to improve pre-K through 5, and then of course the middle school as well, that we start to see those numbers increase again. But in the short term, we're going to use stricter criteria for kids to qualify for math.
Through the chair, may I ask a question?
Sure.
Thank you. Will you have a minimum number for a class size?
Well, that's an interesting question. So if it's going to be a full class, for it to not have a major impact on scheduling, there probably would need to be some kind of minimum. I don't want to say a number here because we can probably make a lot of things work, but there's a range. But if it ends up being like something like 6 kids, like for an example, then what we may do is do it in a different kind of way, where they may still be in grade level math class, and then they've got an accelerated or advanced section in addition to that. So we just do it in a different format for that smaller group in place of like an extra art or music, for example. So there's some flexibility there of how we'll proceed if the numbers end up being like single digits.
Yeah.
You know?
Thank you.
World languages is also something you guys asked about. So the middle school is going to offer 2 languages moving forward, Spanish and Mandarin Chinese. Students in 6th grade for the past 4 years now have not been taking world languages. We're going to, and then they've kind of just almost randomly picked what language they wanted to choose for 7th and 8th grade. We're going to expose as many 6th graders as possible, almost all of them, to half a year of Spanish, half a year of Mandarin Chinese, really basic introductory kind of courses, so that then at the end of 6th grade, they can make a much more informed decision about pursuing Mandarin or Spanish moving forward. We're phasing out Latin as a middle school course. It'll become a high school level course. But it should be noted that all of our world languages, as our population numbers increase, there's a lot more interest in world languages. And so the staffing has adjusted a little bit, where the high school's numbers are really impressive in terms of how many kids are taking Latin and Chinese and Spanish, all of the languages. And so some of those positions were shared in the past, but we're going to have our own. We have our own Spanish teacher now. We'll have our own Spanish teacher next year, but Chinese, we'll have our own Chinese teacher, and the high school will have the current Chinese teacher. So that's a nice problem to have, and I think a nice adjustment for us to be able to start it in 6th grade And we're still seeking a part-time Spanish teacher at the intermediate school, and so the hope long-term is to really expose kids even earlier than when they get to us, which we will then adapt to if that takes place.
What was the thinking behind getting rid of Latin?
Yeah, so I think that of the three languages, the interest at the middle school level, those had the lowest numbers. That language had the lowest numbers. And a lot of kids are able at the high school level, I think, if they wanted to take more than one language, they could take Spanish and Latin and reinforce their vocabulary for SATs, things like that. But it seemed to be more geared towards a high school level course than middle school. Field trips you asked about as well. So I think later on your agenda, you've got the 7th grade team seeking approval for a field trip, an overnight trip. And we haven't been doing overnight trips in the middle school since I've been here. We are exploring options to bring that back. So you'll hear from the 7th grade. I won't steal their thunder if you have questions for them. Otherwise, you can just give it the stamp of approval. But it's a great trip that they've got proposed to a camp in New Hampshire. 6th grade is looking at possible field trip opportunities as well. And so they may be in touch with you seeking approval at a later date. And we're shifting the curriculum in the social studies department because the state has shifted their standards and frameworks for the grade levels. 8th grade next year will be more of a U.S.-centered civics course. And so that brings up an opportunity potentially to bring students to Washington, D.C. So we may rekindle that Washington, D.C. trip. And so we may get on the agenda at the next meeting to seek your approval for that. We're just in the very early stages of exploring what would the cost be, what would the fundraising be that we have to do for that, how can we make it a trip that as close to 100% of our students participate in as possible, what are the ties to the curriculum? There's many. There's a lot of direct ties to both the history curriculum and our language arts curriculum, so that's exciting, so be on the lookout for that. I think that was all of the updates. Interventions, I talked a little bit about math interventions, and this year we started Win-Win, which stands for what I need, who I need, and so we really have gotten very good at our teachers knowing their students based on data and then putting in place interventions based on how they're performing in class and on MAP assessments and MCAS assessments. So every 6 weeks or so, it's a little fluid. They take a look at the data, they group students that maybe need some extra help in reading or extra help in math or maybe some challenge problems in math, and they're grouped by data into different either remediation or extension groups, and that's been a successful in this first year of that.
Pauline?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. I'm really happy to hear about the project-based learning, and I'd love to see if we could ask our teachers to come and just do a short presentation to our committee for the success of the 2 years. Because I know we heard in the first year, but I'd love to get a final. I love that it's expanding throughout the grade. And I love also the field trips, and I think we don't do enough field trips for our kids, so I love that you're looking at overnight. And this is just a question, because I'm sure when you're looking at your schedule, I would not want to be in your shoes or Donna's shoes trying to figure out this. But are you thinking that you may be looking at changing the schedule at all? And I ask from the perspective of being able to do field trips during the school day, not overnights, but just giving the students an opportunity to leave school to go somewhere, say on island.
Yeah, we've gone through iterations of the schedule that have like kind of longer blocks built into the school day, and so that's one of the drafts. It's literally a jigsaw puzzle that almost doesn't have all the right pieces, and so you're just trying to manipulate and get as many pieces to fit as possible. So that's one of the things that we'll try to do. But the reason I'm not projecting a schedule is because we haven't figured it all out yet. So we could, there's not going to be a major overall from this year to next, but the number of minor adjustments that we make just hasn't been determined yet because we may not be able to figure all of that out. But that's something we're keeping in mind. Having PBL teachers present, I'm not making eye contact with them, but I'm sure they're smiling and saying, this is great, can't wait to present. And there was
what have we got to? Yeah.
There's something else that you said.
No, it was project-based learning and then the field trips.
Field trips, yeah. So the other thing that is interesting that I've asked, again, Mr. Millen's never going to show up again because I keep mentioning his name, but Mr. Millen to explore is the idea of virtual field trips as well. The technology with a simple cardboard box called Google Cardboard, but there are other more advanced devices as well that you can stick just any smartphone in and go on a virtual reality experience where like places you at the pyramids or the White House or things like that is something that as soon as I mentioned it to him, he started exploring it. And so we'll try to work with both him and Mr. Lucas, the 6th grade teacher. Their curriculum is a 2-year course of world cultures. And so while Washington, D.C. is feasible, taking kids to Egypt is not so feasible. And so that may be a way that we can have some more kind of creative technology-infused field trip experiences.
Yeah.
Thank you again. Kudos on the field trips. That was something I have to say I feel like we've been missing in the middle school, and I'm so excited to see that you're really making an effort. Will there still be time in the day for the 6th graders to have recess time, or I'm not sure if you call it recess, but
yeah, we call it recess.
Okay.
And it's pretty limited currently, and kind of moving forward. There's so many competing interests for time, and yet the value of it is important. The reality, in whether it's 6th grade, 7th grade, or 8th grade, the way our lunch blocks play out is, for the most part, they're 30 minutes. I think you've heard me say before, our kids literally eat lunch anywhere from 7 to 12 minutes. They eat their lunch, and then they're ready to like go run around. And so we've kind of gotten creative with ways for them to, particularly in the cold weather, which seems to be the whole school year, go to the gym if we can't go outside, but have at least some time to be able to burn off some of that energy, which is good for everyone.
Yeah, it's really important, especially coming up from, the elementary and intermediate school where that's built into their schedule. I think that's very valuable. Thank you.
Anything else?
No, I'm good.
Steve?
I have a few. As recommended at this meeting 3 weeks ago, Mr. Cohen and Mr. Cosworth and I sat down and talked about my concerns. Unfortunately, this doesn't go into that kind of detail. So, and I don't know if you're prepared to answer those questions, but I'll ask them and we'll see. The first one would be, when do you envision having a final schedule?
I am hopeful that it will be, I'm not sure I want to use the word final, but pretty close to that prior to the end of the school year.
So by the time of our next meeting, the 19th, might be able to be more detailed.
I mean, I could have projected this. This is like the working draft, but it's just a bunch of colors and squares right now that isn't going to fully make sense. So we're close. I just have to make sure that it does this work within all of the things that we're trying to achieve. Other things that we didn't mention is every teacher is guaranteed a certain amount of planning time, and we want to incorporate meetings that we talked about. And so you have to make sure that within this number of squares, can everything fit? And so I'm close. I hate to use the word final because I'm still tinkering with it.
No, I understand that, and this reflects that. Academic blocks, do you have it? How long are they now?
55 to 60 minutes.
And are you envisioning changing that?
It's possible in that we say core and encore, and unfortunately when we do that, a class like Spanish or Chinese falls under the encore schedule currently, and they kind of get shortchanged with minutes. Encore classes are only 45 minutes, whereas the core classes are the 55 to 60 minutes. I'm trying to, in the schedule, make that a little bit more equitable so that there isn't a difference in time for Chinese compared to math, social studies, science, because to learn a language, you need the time. So the range will be, instead of 55 to 60, will be 51 to 60. So there may be a four minute adjustment.
I acknowledge that the encore teachers want more time. The concern I have about that is that it's the academic subjects that are being tested, whether we like it or not, and we're not having the success that we hoped to have. And that's not my judgment. I mean, administration has acknowledged that we're still struggling. I would say, especially in math, are you in, see, I don't know how to word these because you haven't made up your mind yet. So don't necessarily take my wording as an implication. In math, are you planning to keep the 2-teacher in a classroom model?
Not as frequently as we currently have it. So what you're describing is we've got a math interventionist that provides interventions within the context of the math classroom.
Right.
I think that while there's some value in that, it's probably going to be even more valuable for a student that requires some extra assistance in math to be in the math class, and then to have some math tutoring take place from the math interventionist in addition to that. So the math interventionist may be in a section as opposed to 3 or 4 sections of math, so that they have the context of exactly what's going on, but see kids separately from that in addition.
Would that be more of an additional class as opposed to trying to work it into win-win? Win-win is what, 3 days a week?
2.
2 days a week.
Yep. And that's only a 30
minutes. So with
this
passing times and so on, it's a pretty minimal block of time. So you are considering, and I hate to do this because I've stated previously emphatically how in favor I am of art and music and theater and, the whole child approach. But where we're seeing difficulties, especially in math, is with kids who need more math. We have essentially 2 English classes, at least at the 6th and 7th grade level. They have English and they have writing. We don't have that in math, and I'm wondering if we should. Now, that would, I acknowledge, take away from some students' ability to have, art or music or PE or whatever it is. But if we're going to be improving our math scores, it seems to me at least, and to people I've talked to, that there are a number of kids, I can't put a percentage on it, who need what I'm going to call, and I hope it's not a loaded phrase, remedial math. Remedial pathway. You talked about an advanced pathway, which is great. What about a remedial pathway? You and I and Mr. Kozor talked about that possibility. Is that something that you're considering, having a class where the kids are primarily working on remediation?
So yeah, that's the model that I described where, again, the kids would be in the math class, but then they'd have some math tutoring working on concepts that they are working on in real time in that math class. So in the past, we've had a separate math, we called it action math, and they were just doing foundational skills, just in general, not directly tied to what was going on in the math class. Now it'll be real time math tutoring, for lack of a better term, that'll take place in lieu of an art class, for example, for kids that need it. So not in the win-win block. So that is something that we're working on. Again, if you speak to all teachers and you speak to the art teacher and the music teacher, and in particular the world language teachers, not calling their classes academic classes would be insulting to them. And so we have to...
And I don't intend to be insulting, but they're not MCAS tested. And that's what we're all being held to as a standard, is English and math, and now soon science.
Well, I'd hate to see us get rid of those other things just because they don't have an MCAS test, because I would argue that the work that students do in music, in art, kids that thrive in those areas often are the kids that also thrive academically.
I don't deny it.
Yeah.
I don't deny it. I just, when I look at balancing academics, traditionally academics with those.
Steve, I will tell you, historically, when we have touched on art and music, We have filled this auditorium with people
I understand that.
are looking for our scalps.
And I
Now
know.
I'm pretty easy. You're a little
I know
tougher.
that I'm asking a loaded question, and Peter and Mike and I talked about it, and I just think it's time that we have a conversation.
But you need a longer school day.
I agree.
And you know what? There was 2 math classes offered at the 6th grade level, and
The
they
results didn't
researched it, and the results didn't change. So taking that away from the students was proven to not be as beneficial as you would think. And I'm also speaking as a parent who had a student in 2 math classes, and it wasn't well
Yep, I
enjoyed
know.
and liked.
I agree, and I don't disagree that did not work out. That doesn't mean we shouldn't try to fix it, though. Just because it didn't work in one
Right, but it
year for
sounds
whatever
as if-
reasons, and we can stay away from those.
Right.
Why are we doing 2 sets of English classes and not 2 sets of math if our math scores are more troublesome than our English scores? And I believe they are.
I would argue that the model we have for literacy will absolutely pay dividends in math as well, because I think there's enough evidence that some of the deficits that we see in math are due to the students not fully understanding what is being asked of them on the test. It's language heavy.
And I admit the tests are awful. And
Agreed.
it's on my agenda to attempt to do something. Don Quixote
Good luck.
and the windmills of the state are on my agenda.
Good luck.
I understand, just so I can say a couple of things that I sort of agree with. I understand why you're doing the Latin thing. It's good to have it in the high school. What accommodations are being made for the 7th graders who had Latin this year, and now there isn't a Spanish one or a Mandarin one in the 8th grade?
Yep, that is regret that we have that we weren't able to accommodate more of the kids that are currently taking Latin in 7th. They can pick up Latin again in 9th. Some of them have some prior experience with Spanish and will be able to slide into a Spanish class. If they really wanted to start one of the other languages, as opposed to taking a year off from world language, we can figure that out within this schedule, and so they could do that. But ultimately, some of them, it's not so much that they're not prepared to go into Chinese or Spanish, it's that they really are enjoying the Latin class and want to take it in 8th grade. So that is something that we haven't been able to work out, mainly because enrollment at the high school is so high. We had hoped that maybe there'd be a handful of spots available. There just isn't, because a lot of students are taking up.
I follow that. I'm just concerned about the kids that had it for a year, and what are they going to be able to do?
Yeah.
So if I can add, and when we talked about this, but one of the challenges is that you really need a .2 Latin teacher.
Oh, yeah, right.
And in order to be able to provide for that group, if you're going to have the present Latin teacher at the high school full time, and I'll tell you, recruiting teachers onto the island is hard enough. You're not going to get somebody come here for a .2 position. So the reality of that, and that's why when we talked, Peter said it would be better to have a full-time Chinese rather than splitting that and splitting Latin than having the part-time. And so it's the reality of
I
trying
agree.
to,
.2s have been impossible.
so that's the big challenge for that.
Just impossible.
Yeah.
Grade level team meetings. How many? You have a 5-day week now.
Correct.
How many regular grade level team planning meetings are there this year?
There are 2 that are required. Many of our teams meet more frequently than that.
So the time's available for that.
There's probably time available daily or 4 out of 5 days, but the teams are required to have 2 team meetings a week. But again, many of them meet more than that.
Is your anticipated schedule, are you hoping that your schedule
We'll still have at least
would
2.
still accommodate being able to have more than 2 grade level team meetings a week?
Not necessarily the whole team available at the same time, more than 2, but I don't know yet. That's one of the things.
Because I'm a traditionalist in that, 24 years. When I came to CPS, it was an essential part of our middle school model that the grade level teams be able to meet. They have over 100 kids. And to be able to talk about those kids and analyze and work on, joint approaches to how to deal with those kids twice a week, I don't think cuts it. And I can't tell you, I won't swear on a stack of Bibles that we met 5 days a week. Well, it was the 6-day schedule, and I never liked that, so I'm glad you changed it. 2 days a week isn't enough for the whole team, and the way things have been for at least the last year, I don't know about before that, the special needs teachers cannot regularly be a part of those meetings. Under the schedules we used to have, they were a part of that team.
Special ed teachers are able to be part of at least one of those meetings, one of the two currently, and sometimes more. The structure of the meetings has really been streamlined as well, because we've worked hard with the team leaders about how to maximize the time that they do have on those two required meetings on how to use it. And the other reality is that the middle school has an absolute luxury that the other schools do not have in their ability to meet as grade levels as frequently as 2 times, let alone 3, 4, or 5 times. The other schools, particularly NIS and NES, would give anything to have that kind of time. And it's so, even though 2 may not sound like a lot to you, to them, it is an absolute luxury, and I would say that 2 is enough. And yeah, it would be great to have more meeting time. Sure.
With all due respect, I don't think all the grade level teams agree, but I wouldn't call it a luxury. The basis for it when we set up the middle school, or they set it up and I came the next year, was that this was a very important time in these kids' lives. Not to say that the younger kids aren't important and changing and the older kids aren't, but the middle school was a real transition time in their lives. And that's why having those grade level team meetings was considered to be so important. I grant you it's more than the other buildings have, but I don't consider that it was a luxury. And I, at least, and others, would appreciate it if you would consider more than 2 in whatever turns out to be your final thinking. Did I not hear technology listed as an encore?
That's correct.
Are you eliminating that?
As a standalone, as opposed to incorporating technology into the classes, we are. Kids are coming up with much more experience with technology than ever before. Every 5th grade classroom, and probably 3rd and 4th grade classroom too, has their own. Each classroom has their own cart of Chromebooks within the classroom. So the kids are coming in with a whole lot more skills and savviness on the computers, and just about every teacher of every subject uses technology, and along the way teaches them the skills that they need to. So to do it in a standalone way has been less than successful over the past couple of years. So we're going to move away from that model, at least for this year. Will it return in the future? Maybe if it was more of a robotics or engineering or STEM kind of focus, once we have better improved facilities, like a makerspace that we might get in the future in a couple of years, maybe a course could come back. But in the short term, it doesn't make sense to teach technology in isolation, and that's what is coming out more and more with
I would agree at all
Maskey.
3 grade levels, but I wonder about the 6th graders coming in. And there's a new set of state standards now that have gone into effect. They no longer call them a draft. I looked them up the other day. The last time when I was teaching technology, they were just considered a draft for comment. They are now officially digital literacy and computer science standards.
There have been.
And they include that whole list down the side of my page here.
As a responsibility for every teacher, not a standalone technology.
Right, but how much? And listen to some of these things when I list them. Can you expect the classroom teachers to take on in addition to what they're already doing and constantly having added to their plates.
When you go to battle with the state over MCAS and standardized tests, maybe you can adding more and more requirements. of each
Well,
of the teachers as well.
I will add a longer school day, and we'll talk about that come the fall. I'm just going to read these quickly. Some of these were from me, and some of them are from those standards. Basic computer skills, word processing, typing, research, digital literacy, digital safety, including knowledge of cyberbullying, harassment. I hate to use the word sexting, but I have to because it's in there. Copyright and ownership. Algorithms are in the 6th to 8th grade standards. Algorithms. Demonstrating knowledge of the acceptable use policy of the school. Understanding bias. Collaborating in preparation of products that the kids turn out, citation forms, hardware, operating systems, hard versus wireless, databases, sorting, filtering, etc. I cannot see how you can expect your classroom teachers to incorporate all of that into what they're already doing. And I would say I taught, as you know, was it 2 years ago, year before? No, 3 now maybe. Introductory technology to 6th graders. I had all the 6th graders half the time. And I was able to create a curriculum that covered a lot of that. I didn't even mention speed of typing. They have a standard in there of 5 words per grade level. So your 8th graders should be touch typing blind 40 words a minute. I can't see how the teachers can work all this stuff into their schedules. And I'm not going to recommend that you have technology at all 3 levels. I know that's not possible. But to have it as an introductory course for 6th graders, I have to believe you can work into the schedule. And given the expectations now, I mean, not just because the state says so. Some of this stuff is silly. You know, algorithms, come on. Analyzing and writing, creating algorithms. I don't think we're going to get there. But a lot of this basic stuff, hit or miss in the academic classes, I don't think is the right way to go. And I encourage you, if that's the right word, when you're looking at your schedule of encores, to have someone, I don't know how many sections it would take of 6th graders. I found it did not have to be all 5 days or all 6 days. But I think that's a very important one. The writers, contributors to this set of standards stated at one point that grade 8 students make their final decisions about whether to pursue science and engineering by the end of 8th grade. And if we just leave them to learn this on their own, I don't think that's fair to however many kids we have, 300 and whatever in the middle school.
But I think that stuff seems to me to be incorporated in these other classes. I mean, I think
it
it's
starts as early as the elementary school.
I mean, citations.
I know they're starting on that, and I expect it's going to get better. But I also don't think we should be sloughing it off. That's not the right word, I know. To the 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade staff and administration and say, well, these kids need to have, this when they get to the 6th grade. I just don't see it as possible.
Well, I don't see it without a longer day, quite frankly. Steve, I'd like to move along if you're through. Good. Thank you very much, Peter.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
No, because I would like to get out of here before it gets too dark. Committee discussion and votes to be taken. A vote in the amended policy JKAA, physical restraint of students.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Who wrote? Yeah, second. Who wrote these?
This is a recommended policy by the Massachusetts Association of School Committees. And Michelle went through it to update our restraining policy, which we've had since 2011. She is the person in the district who I would say has the most information, the most knowledge on how we needed to upgrade that with respect to certain definitions. There aren't a lot of changes, and they're highlighted in red for you to see.
Motion's been made and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Congdon and McGoffin scholarships.
You have a slate before you that I would ask for you to make a motion. We have graduation on Saturday, and love to have this so that they can be announced.
Okay.
And without mentioning the names, is that the idea?
Yeah, I think so. Yes.
Okay, good, fine, understood.
Second.
And who put these together? Who chose these?
These were a subcommittee of the school committee. You had Tim and Pauline and John Bucky and me on that committee.
It's all right with them, it's all right with me.
Okay. Move approval?
We
So
had
moved.
first, we had a second.
Okay, second. Good. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Approve the donation from Poets Corner Press to Nantucket Community School in the amount of $100.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Approve a donation from Remain Nantucket to Nantucket Community School for Adult Education and GED Prep to the tune of $38,000.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Approve a donation from Ahold Delhaize USA Stop and Shop to CPS gift account of $1,497.86.
So moved.
So moved, is that the one from using your cards at the Stop and Shop?
All in favor?
Aye.
Vote to approve the field trip for CPS 7th grade to Camp Cody in Freedom, New Hampshire for STEM and environmental science lessons. They plan on going September 24th to the 26th, 2018.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Mike?
If I may just speak to that briefly after you've approved it, and thank you for that. I think it's great to have this. I'm delighted about the trip to Washington, D.C. that the 8th graders will be taking. I've done that many times in the past as a history teacher. But I would like to be very upfront and clear that these trips, when you're going overnight with middle school kids, have parameters. And the behavior of kids is a key component to whether they go or not. And I want, I've already talked to Peter about that, and I think I hope the teachers would be in full agreement, but we don't want to, I'll be honest, bring a child to Washington, D.C. that we can't trust beyond the bus. And so behavior leading up to these events, and so that may come back to you, and I just want to be full disclosure that that's a critical piece.
We've done that in the past with various trips, and I don't think too many people are going to disagree. Can I just commend, have we voted in favor of this? Are we done? I just really want to commend the teachers who are doing this. You want to talk above and beyond the call of duty. 2 overnights with middle school kids, and they're away from their families. They're away from, their regular lives. It's a real commitment on their part, and I think they should be commended for doing it. Thank you.
The other thing that I wanted to point out is that I like front-ending this field trip. Normally, we do things at the end of the year because it's sort of a celebration, and, we made it this far. Front-ending it has the added benefit of building that collaborative spirit and part of the, in this case, 7th grade team. So I think that sometimes we need to think that way rather than at the tail end, let's go to the roller coaster.
Yeah, well, and the amount of work that goes into the preparation, setting it up, etc.
Can I have a motion to approve?
Sorry, this one through the chair to Peter. specifically with taking students off island, you may have this in place already, but could you put out to parents ahead of time, like a month or two ahead of time, ideally, so that they can have conversations with their students? I know that there are some students that would greatly gain from going off island, but may get excited or may get nervous, and their behavior at school might need to be supported prior to the trip. And I would really hate to see a student lose the ability or the privilege of traveling because of any diagnosis or just the nervousness of them leaving the school. So I wonder if there is anything in place, or if you'd consider putting something in place or offering conversations with parents who may think that might be an anticipated concern, because I would love to see all students that want to go, and parents would like them to not have them be eliminated because of a behavior the week before.
Through the chair, apparently is the way we do these things. In the past, parents have been advised of the behavioral concerns and restrictions that might exist. I think you're right to focus on helping those kids, but the parents also need to be advised well ahead of time that, continued misbehavior, if we can call it that, will result in a restriction.
Right. I just think putting it ahead would be terrific for the student success. Thank you, Tim.
You've been doing that besides the schedule. Okay, move approval of the May 15th meeting minutes.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Transfers and invoices. Move approval.
So moved.
Second.
Mike, why don't we have any transfers?
We have been trying very hard to please the school committee, and in particular Zona, who's had that agenda to minimize transfers. Now, there will be probably some transfers in the next school committee meeting, because sometimes there are at this time of year, but we're...
Well, I mean, I thought the concerns Zona had were the ones in November.
I agree.
As opposed to the ones this time of year.
Yep, they were. But I would like to answer better budgeting. So I think...
Superintendents report.
Enrollment has gone up one student from last month. We are at an all-time high of 1,645 students in our school district. It's remarkable. The high school is at 536. Largest school by far in the district now. It used to be the elementary school. Elementary is 372. The intermediate is 380. And the Cyrus Pierce is 357. So the building project has certainly helped moderate those numbers and make them workable in each of the schools. But the high school is bursting at the seams, and so we're still challenged for space both at the middle and high school. And then on the horizon, I'm going to check about the Rotaries for the next meeting. I'll check with Mike Burns. We'll do the appointment of the clerk. That's a pretty quick agenda item. The annual technology report, it will be Karen's last report to the school committee as she moves on to the town side of things. I'd like to move the ELL PAC update to July. And depending on what you want to do with the Rotaries, whether you want to have athletics on June 19th or wait until July, we're at your pleasure on that.
Can we leave it hanging until you find out what they give you for
the Rotaries
for a timeline?
Sure.
If they'll give you a timeline.
Yep.
I'm wondering as well, this is something I'm really kind of interested and fascinated about, is the amount of technology use. And I've just been reading so much data about technology use in regards to mental wellness or the opposite. And getting the nurse's report with the number of students that they see with headaches, the amount of technology that we use and we require students to use for homework assignments. I would like to see if there was some way to get a report of how much time during the school day our students from NES through high school are on devices. They're on screen time. It would be.
It may be a third of what they're getting when they get home. That's the problem.
I understand.
And so if they
that.
got a headache, that's what I'd
But
look
could
at
we
first.
not put together a survey to send to teachers and ask how much, I don't know how many minutes they have, a couple hundred a week, how much time their kids are on computers? It varies, that's for sure, from teacher to teacher.
It does, but I know as a parent, I struggle with, just the addiction aspect of technology and my own kids.
Yeah.
And, having that Chromebook at home is just, and saying I have homework, it's just, it's very hard as a parent to monitor how much they really need to be on their devices.
Well, and
I was just going to say, you just heard Steve rattle off the new standards.
Yeah.
I think it was a struggle to get them in, and I think
There needs to be a
paper.
balance. When I was in China and I was in the high school, those high school students were not carrying around Chromebooks.
Yeah.
They had textbooks going class to class.
And I can add a bit of a wrench in favor of what you're saying, that being there was a study, it's about a year ago now, that came out that indicated that students do not learn a topic as well typing
On a
it
device.
as they do writing it. That having the kinesthetics, the hand involved,
Same with reading a book.
with the brain,
Same with
is
reading a book.
more productive in
I
terms
just-
of long-term learning.
I just want to make sure that our students are well-rounded and there's a balance to
Yep.
their day.
Well, they're not going to be able to bring in book bags, so that answers that question.
They do carry around book bags all day.
I am convinced that whatever they spend in school or on homework is a third of what they're doing outside.
But not necessarily. I will tell you, so many sixth grade parents say that the Chromebooks were like the worst thing that happened to their family. Having their student be assigned to a Chromebook was not the most beneficial thing at all for their student.
Because they use them too much?
Because they use them too much, and it allows their student to do things more than they would feel comfortable with or allow their student to be using the amount of time on the device.
But they're not on Pornhub, okay?
No,
So
hopefully not.
they're using their minds to expand beyond what they have in front of them. You have a damn textbook. The textbooks are outdated by the time you put them in the
I'm
room.
just asking for an update to
No.
see if we can get a feel
Okay.
to make sure that we
We
are
will
well
log the
balanced.
headaches.
We can provide you approximate or ballpark amounts
All
of
I'm
time.
asking.
Quick
And
survey?
we can do that. I think though, I would caution people not to get in love with the amount of time. It's the kind of use that is a more important question. And I think that the supervised use in a classroom by teachers is very different than what the kids are doing on this as soon as they're out of school. And this is a far more, I don't want to say dangerous, but challenging device than the Chromebook in the classroom. And I would say to parents, you control how much Chromebook use is at home. You control that. Don't give up that control. Don't think when your child says, oh, but so-and-so's mom lets them. You control that. Now, fine, we will absolutely give you the amount of use because I think that would be interesting. My guess is that you would find a progression as you go up, and it may be a little challenging, but I think the principals could could elicit that information from their teachers.
And it would be interesting. I mean, I know I hear this excuse a lot, but I need to check to see if I have a homework assignment. And we're hearing this at 5 o'clock. Well, I need to check again at 6 o'clock. And it's like, really? I mean, teachers should not be posting homework assignments beyond a certain time that are expected for the next day.
Well, you're going to bring up the homework issue, which is another.
Well, I'm just saying, hopefully
issue.
there are some guidelines where the teachers aren't posting after a certain time for assignments that would be due the next day.
I was never familiar with that happening.
Okay.
At least in the middle school, which is where I was.
But I'd be surprised.
Thank you.
Jen, when you were in middle school.
When I'm in middle school?
When you were in middle school, the books you were reading were older than I was, okay? And the boundaries of the countries had all changed.
Oh, those little ancient history books that were about this big but this thick. I still have mine.
Ancient history
It's a
doesn't
good way
change.
to fall asleep at night.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's on the shelf.
I am done, yes.
Can I have a,
Mr.
yes.
Chair, I would like to ask, we touched upon it briefly about the PBL, if we could put that on the schedule. I will leave that to Peter and his staff to see when that would be best during the school year. I'd love to see it. And I'm just looking through here, and I don't see student success program. I'd love to see if we could get Andrew Pacelli back maybe in the school year, beginning of next school year, if he could just come back in. We had a very enjoyable presentation with him. I don't remember when he had brought some students, but I'd love to see if we could put that on again.
Sometime next year, though.
Steve told me at one.
I'm limiting myself to one because there were so many in the last 3 weeks. And no offense to anybody I don't mention, but the preschool 25th annual preschool transportation day was a hoot, especially now that they have the 2 circles, so that it made a big figure 8 track for these little guys, some of them bigger, everything from full speed 2-wheelers, and those guys were whizzing around, to some kids that had no pedals and they're pushing with their feet, to a few kids who were, and this is transportation, being pulled by a teacher in a wagon. And I really want to shout out to the staff members. They were so cool, encouraging, helping, smiling the whole time with these kids going around. If I had a heart, it would be heartwarming to have stood there and watched it. It was really a treat.
Okay. Thank you, Steve.
Just 2 shout outs. Sorry, and I'll be brief. Mrs. Melu invited us to her classroom. I arrived at the school. The parking lot was full in the back and the front, and I thought, God, they're all jammed into Mrs. Melu's classroom. But there was a lovely group of parents and students. She had a science project for 6th through 8th. Very impressive, and I loved chatting with the students that I met. So thank you for doing that. And I came out and found that actually there was an arts program, which I wasn't aware of. Was it elementary school?
NES, I think.
The Unified Arts.
It was such a lovely way to end my day with all of the beautiful artwork up in the hallway. And then I walked into an auditorium full of parents and little ones in the aisle on the stage, singing and dancing to a choreographed start. It was just lovely.
I'll just add the final dance. The kids couldn't all fit on the stage, so they had them up around the aisles.
Yes, yeah.
And they're all dancing in the aisles,
I just said, didn't
so to speak.
Yeah, I think so.
Steve, that's 1.5 shots.
And then
Well, I gotta help her out.
And then lastly, Lastly, the academic awards last night. Kudos to our guidance department, Mrs. Fasaro, and to our principal, Dr. Bucky and Jen Saradelis. And your team leaders did a phenomenal job. And what struck me the most is I really feel like last night was a true representation of our student body. And that's what came across to me the most. And that is so wonderful to see. So thank you.
Okay. At this point, a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
I think the